Welcome to the channel. So today we are going to be covering my top 10 Home Assistant helpers with 5 in part 1 and 5 in part 2, all of which will be available through the UI. If you're looking for a specific helper, then use the timestamps to jump to the section of the video. Otherwise, stick around. You might learn something about other helpers too. So firstly, what is a helper? Well, in Home Assistant, helpers are features that allow you to create small variables or data storages that can be used to improve or make more complex automations possible. If we're going through all 19 different helpers, it would be a very long video. So we'll be focused on the top 10 helpers over the 2 videos. And if there is interest in more complex helpers, then I'll create specific videos for those ones. So let's dive on in. So at the time of recording, I'm running on Home Assistant Core 2023.11.2. A button helper is typically used to trigger a specific action or set of actions when pressed. Let's create a simple user case to demonstrate a button helper. I want to create a button helper that can be pressed and will turn on the lounge air conditioning. We're going to build on this example as we go through our helpers. So let's create our helper. Let's go into Settings, Devices and Services, Helpers. Create a helper, select Button. Let's call this Lounge Air Conditioning and give it an icon and press Create. Now I've already created a dashboard, so let's use that to add this button to it. Navigate to the dashboard, edit the dashboard, add a card and select Button. Let's change the entity to the helper that we just created. We can leave the name as the entity is descriptive already. Everything else we can leave alone. We want this button purely to be a toggle to turn on or off the air conditioning. Press Save. Now let's create an automation that will be triggered when this button is pressed. Navigate to Settings, Automations and Scenes. Create an automation. Now we want to add a trigger. Now we want to test to see if the button has been pressed. Select State. Enter in our helper and select. This will trigger when the state of that helper changes. Now we want to add an action. Scroll down to Actions. Press Add Action. Select the device. Now we want to search for the air conditioning. Air conditioner in lounge. Select. Now we want to change the action to toggle air conditioning. Now let's save that automation. Press Save and give it an appropriate name. And press Save. Now let's split screen between 2 different views of our Home Assistant. The one on the left is our automation. The one on our right is the button that we have. If we press the button now, we'll see that the automation has been triggered and the air conditioning is turned on. For our second helper, we'll use the Change Device Type of a switch helper. Home Assistant allows you to convert any Home Assistant switch into a Home Assistant light, cover, fan, lock, or siren. This is particularly useful because in Home Assistant, a wall plug is considered a switch. However, these plugs are often used with a light fixture or a fan. In our lighting automation series, we turned off all lights, and we did this by turning off all of the lights domain, where a domain is a label ahead of the entity name. So in our example, we have a lamp that is in the lounge that is controlled by a switch, well, a smart switch. But this is known as a switch inside of Home Assistant. We want to be able to turn this into a light in the light domain. Let's go and look at the helpers and it will all become clear. Let's create our helper. Settings, Devices and Services, Helpers, create our helper. We want to select Change Device Type of a switch. Now we need to select the entity for the switch that controls the lights. Lounge lamp switch. We want this one to be represented as a light. Select Light and press Submit. Success. Creating a configuration of lounge lamp switch. And it will ask us now where we want to place it. In our case, it's going to be in the lounge, and we'll press Finish. Now let's add this light, which is actually a switch, to our test dashboard. We want to edit the dashboard. We want to add a card. Now we want to add a light card. In this case, I'm going to pick on a mushroom light card. Now we want to select our lounge lamp switch, which is actually a light. For the purposes of the demonstration, I'm typing in the full entity name, but you can now see that at the front end of our switch, it is now called a light. This is what the helper is actually converted across. Now we should select this. We can leave all the defaults alone. Press Save. and press Done. We can now turn on our light or off our light. Home Assistant will understand this as a light now. So now, as per the previous example, if we went in and turned off all the lights domain, this light would turn off, where previously it would be noted as a switch and would not have turned off. We've already covered schedule, at least in part, in the lighting automation video part 3, but to recap, a schedule helper allows you to set a repeating user-defined schedule over a period of a week that will store values for the off and on based on the schedules that you enter. In this example, we'll turn on the lounge lights, which is now a light, not a switch, at 6:30 p.m. and we'll turn them off each night at 10:30 each night. So let's create our helper. Settings, Devices and Services, Helpers, create a helper. Select a schedule, give it a name, Lounge Lights Schedule. Optionally, give it an icon. In my case, I'm going to give it Sofa. Now in the calendar format below, mark off from 6:30 to 10:30 each night in a similar way that you would do in an Outlook calendar. Once you've done this, press the Create button. Home Assistant will create the schedule helper for you. It will be noted as a schedule and it has an entity ID that we can check against. Now let's create an automation based on this schedule helper. To do this, navigate to Settings, Automations and Scenes, create an automation, add a trigger. We're going to check on a state. In the entity ID, add the schedule helper that you just created and select it. Note an easy way to find schedule helpers is simply to type the word schedule. This will bring up all of the schedule helpers. We'll have two triggers here. One will be for when the state changes to on and the other is when it changes to off. In the To section, use the drop down and select on. Go to the dots in the top right hand corner, edit your ID and give it a trigger ID. In this case, Lounge Lights On. Now we need to repeat this for the off state. Go to the dots in the top right hand corner, select Duplicate, scroll down to the other trigger, expand it out, change the trigger ID to off. In the To status, change this to off. Scroll down. In the actions, press Add Action. Select Choose. Expand option 1. Set a condition based on a trigger ID. Select a trigger ID of Lounge Lights On. Inside of option 1, add an action. Call a service. Look for a service of light colon space turn on. Select. Choose the target entity of the lounge lamp, which is in the light domain now, and select. Now we need to scroll down, go to the three dots on option 1, and duplicate. Scroll down to option 2. Expand out the condition. Untick the lights on and select the lights off. Expand the action. In this case, we're going to change the turn lights on. Press the X in the service. Search for light colon turn off and select. Select your entity, which will be the lounge lamps in the light domain, and select. Save your automation and give it a name, and press Save. This automation will turn on the lounge lamp at 6:30 every night and will turn off the lounge lamp at 10:30 every night. We can adjust the schedule accordingly, and this will apply to this automation. As this helper is set up within the Home Assistant Helpers section, there is nothing to display on the actual dashboard. However, we might want to show the status of the lamp inside of the dashboard, or use in conjunction with the button to be able to turn on the lamp outside of the schedule. But for demonstration purposes, we won't add that to the dashboard. For our fourth helper, we'll be using the number helper. A common complaint within Alexa volume controls is that there is no way of setting the volume across multiple Echo devices. In this example, we'll be using a slider on a dashboard that we'll use to adjust the volume for all Echo devices, although in this case we'll be limiting it to the lounge and the study Echoes, but the principle still applies. Let's create our helper. Settings, Devices and Services, Helpers, create our helper. This time we're going to be selecting the number helper. Give it an appropriate name. In this case, all Echo volume. Now because Echo devices have a range between 0 and 1, with 1 being 100, we need to set our minimums and maximums. Our minimum should be 0, but our maximum will be a 1. We're going to create it as a display mode slider. Our increment steps will be 0.05. This will create us a 5% increments in volume. Now we can press Create. If we search for our helper now, we can see that it's been set up with an input underscore number dot all underscore echo underscore volume. This will be the helper that we'll use inside of our dashboard. Go back to the dashboard and press the three dots in the top right hand corner. Edit the dashboard, add a card. We're going to use a card called a mushroom number card. If you don't have the mushroom cards, go and watch the video on the Hacks integrations. Select this card. Now put in the entity that we created before, the all echo volume, and select the all echo volume. As you can see, the visual editor is not able to represent the display underscore mode. For this case, we don't actually need this, so we can delete this section. And press save. And press done. You should now have a graphical representation of the universal volume for all echoes. Let's go and put this in an automation. For the purposes of demonstration, I'll limit this to just two echoes, one in the lounge and one in the study. But you'll see the principle and can adapt and adjust to whatever you want. Let's go to Settings, Automations, create a new automation, add a trigger. We're going to be basing this on a state. Select our helper, all echo volume. We don't need to put anything else into this, as this would be a trigger based on a change of value. Scroll down, add an action. We want to call a service, and inside of our service, we're going to search for media player set volume and select. Inside of our target, we want to choose the echoes that we want to set the volume for. We've selected the targets of the study echo and the lounge echo. Now we can't actually set the volume for those echoes inside of the UI. So we're going to have to switch across into YAML mode to make a very small change. Press the three dots in the top right hand corner, scroll down to Edit in YAML. Now copy in the following code. This will be available in the description below. The code is basically unchanged. The only thing we're actually changing is this section right at the very bottom, where we're going to be inputting the value for the all echo volume and inserting that as the volume levels that will be applied to the two entities of Media Player Lounge and Media Player Study. We can now press save, give it a name, and press save. Now let's test it out. If we go into split screen mode, we can now see our volume over in the left hand side, and we now have our automation on the right hand side. If we change the volume associated with the all echo volume, we should now see that the automation has been triggered. You should now hear on your Echo devices a ping as the volume changes, and the top of them will light up with the corresponding volume level that they have been set to. While on the topic of numbers, if you'd like to protect your IP address, well, I know it's a bit of a stretch with a bunch of numbers and dots, but the best I could come up with, why not consider using NordVPN from the links in the description below for 68% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months. So click on the links below and go and take advantage of this offer. Now back to the helpers with groups, probably the most used helper of all. Now I left probably the most used helper until lucky last. Most people don't even think of this as a helper, but this is where it is accessed. I am of course referring to the group function. This allows you, as the name suggests, to group entities and give them a new entity name. This is further enhanced in that it allows you to group binary sensors, covers, events, fans, lights, locks, media players, sensors, and switches. As a practical example, in the previous helper for the numbers, we identified the echo devices individually. Now let's extend this example and create a media group to replace the two echoes with a group. The advantages of doing this is that if we want to change the echoes in the group, we could do that without having to adjust the automation. So let's do that now. Go into Settings, go into Devices and Services, go into Helpers, create your helper. Scroll down to Groups, select Media Player Group and give it a name. All Echoes Group. Now we need to allocate the Study Echo and the Lounge Echo. Press Submit to save. All Echoes Group. Press Finish. If we search for the individual entity, we can now find it with mediaplayers.all_echoes_group with a type of group. We can now use this inside of our automation. Take a copy of the entity ID. Now let's move back to our number automation. Select this. Go down to the section for the actions. You'll notice inside of the entity ID we have the Player Lounge and Study. We're going to be replacing this with the entity ID that we copied for the group. We can now press save. Now let's go and test it out. Let's go and have a look inside of the developer tools at the volume for the Study Echo. Navigate to Developer Tools, search for Media_Player_Study. You will see the volume level is set to 3. Our universal volume is set to 3. If we increase our universal volume to 4 and press our refresh, we'll see the volume has set to 4 as well. Success, it's working. Now I extrapolate this and control my master volume across all my echoes. Plus, I have individual scripts set up so that when notifications come out, it sets the volumes on the appropriate echoes and sets the volume accordingly, and then reverts them back to a previous state. You can extrapolate this automation to meet your specific user cases. So that's my top 5 of 10 Home Assistant helpers. In part 2, we'll be extending these with another 5 helpers, focusing on time, date, counters, and text. So make sure you consider subscribing and dinging that notification bell to be notified when the next video releases. So what do you use helpers for? What are your most used helpers? Do you like watching these videos for specific work through scenarios? Or do you learn the concept and build your own automations based on your learnings? Let me know in the comments below. Then remember that no one knows everything and we're all on this journey together. So use the community to help us all. Until the next one.